Picture this. You're managing a critical pipeline system. Everything's running perfectly, and then suddenly, complete communication blackout. No data from your remote sites, no control over critical valves, nothing. What you might not realize is that the culprit could be happening 93 million miles away on the surface of the sun. Hey everyone, Alana here. In my 35 years working with industrial control systems, I've seen a lot of things take down Scada communications, storms, equipment failures, human error. But there's one threat that's becoming increasingly important that most operators don't even know about: solar flares and space weather. Let me start with the basics, because understanding the enemy is half the battle. Solar flares are massive explosions on the sun's surface that release enormous amounts of energy. We're talking about the equivalent of billions of nuclear bombs going off simultaneously. Now here's what matters to us as control systems professionals. These flares don't just create pretty auroras, they unleash 3 types of effects that can absolutely wreck our communication systems. First, we get immediate radio blackouts from X-ray radiation that hits Earth in just 8 minutes. Think of it like someone turning up a massive radio jammer pointed right at your HF and sometimes VHF links. Second, we get what's called solar energetic particles, high-speed atomic bullets that can fry satellite electronics and create absorption zones that block radio signals, especially over the polar regions. And third, this one's the big one for power-dependent systems, we get geomagnetic storms that can induce massive currents in power grids, potentially taking down the very electricity that powers our communication infrastructure. The scary part? We become completely dependent on technologies that are sitting ducks for this stuff. GPS timing for cellular networks, satellite communications for remote sites, even our backup radio systems, they're all vulnerable. Let me break down exactly how this affects the communication technologies you're probably using right now in your Scada systems. If you're using HF radio for long-distance telemetry, and many of us still do for remote pipeline monitoring or offshore platforms, you're looking at complete signal blackouts during major solar flares. We're not talking about a little static here. I mean total communication loss that can last anywhere from minutes to hours. The technical reason is that X-rays from the flare supercharge the D region of the ionosphere on the sunlit side of Earth, and it just absorbs your HF signals like a sponge. NOAA actually has a scale for this, R1 through R5, where R5 means complete HF blackout across the entire sunlit hemisphere. VHF and UHF are generally more resilient, but don't get comfortable. During severe space weather, you can get something called scintillation, rapid signal fading that makes your data unreliable. Plus, there's this phenomenon called sporadic E that can create unexpected long-distance propagation, causing interference from stations hundreds of miles away. I've seen this personally, suddenly getting interference on a VHF Scada link from some distant transmitter that's normally way beyond range. It's like atmospheric conditions suddenly decided to play relay station. Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something most people don't realize. Modern cellular networks, 4G, 5G, all of them, depend critically on GPS timing signals for synchronization between cell towers. When solar activity disrupts GPS signals through ionospheric interference, those cell towers can lose synchronization. Result? Your cellular Scada connections start dropping, data rates plummet, or you lose service entirely. And this isn't just affecting your remote RTUs, it's potentially taking down the entire cellular network in your area. Satellite communications face a double whammy. First, the signal path goes right through that ionosphere I mentioned, so you get scintillation effects, signal fading, phase shifts, data errors. This is especially bad for L-band and S-band systems that many IoT satellite services use. But the bigger threat is direct damage to the satellites themselves. Solar energetic particles can cause what we call single event effects, basically cosmic rays flipping bits in satellite computers, or even permanently damaging electronics. I've seen satellites temporarily shut down their payloads during severe particle storms just to protect themselves. And here's a recent example that should concern anyone considering LEO constellations like Starlink for Scada backhaul. In February 2022, SpaceX lost 38 brand new Starlink satellites because a relatively minor geomagnetic storm increased atmospheric drag and pulled them back to Earth before they could reach operational altitude. Now, you might be thinking, how often does this really happen? Let me give you some perspective from the history books. The granddaddy of all space weather events was the Carrington event in 1859. Telegraph systems worldwide went haywire. Some operators got electric shocks. Telegraph lines sparked and caught fire. Some systems kept working even after their power was disconnected, running purely on the induced currents from the geomagnetic storm. Fast forward to 1989, a geomagnetic storm took down the entire Hydro-Quebec power grid, leaving 6 million people without power for 9 hours. The induced current saturated transformers and tripped critical voltage control equipment. And this isn't ancient history. Just last year in May 2024, we had the strongest geomagnetic storm since 1989. GPS-dependent precision agriculture systems failed, forcing farmers to halt planting operations. Drone operators reported GPS failures and even crashes. This is happening right now in our modern connected world. The pattern is clear. As our technology becomes more sophisticated and interconnected, we become more vulnerable, not less. Here's the good news. Unlike earthquakes or tornadoes, space weather often gives us warning. The key is knowing where to look and how to interpret what you're seeing. Your primary resource is NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center at spaceweather.gov. This is like the National Weather Service for space weather. They provide real-time alerts, forecasts, and specific products designed for infrastructure operators. Learn the scales. R scale for radio blackouts, S scale for solar radiation storms, G scale for geomagnetic storms. When you see an R3 alert, you know your HF links are probably going down for about an hour. G4 or G5 alerts mean you need to be watching your power systems closely for potential outages. One tool I really recommend is their DRAP product, D-Region Absorption Prediction. It shows you in real time where HF radio absorption is happening and how severe it is. If you're running HF Scada links, this is pure gold for understanding when and where you're going to have problems. You can set up email alerts, RSS feeds, even get push notifications on your phone. I recommend setting up alerts for M-class and above solar flares, any geomagnetic storm warnings, and solar radiation storm alerts if you're running satellite communications. The critical thing to understand about timing: solar flare radiation hits in 8 minutes with no advance warning. But coronal mass ejections, which cause the geomagnetic storms, take 1 to 4 days to reach Earth. That gives you time to prepare, check backup systems, maybe postpone critical operations. Now let's talk about what you can actually do about this. I'm going to give you practical strategies that don't require a complete system redesign or a massive budget. First principle, diversity is your friend. Don't put all your eggs in one communication basket. If your primary SCADA link is cellular, have a VHF radio backup. If you're using satellite, have a terrestrial option. Different technologies fail in different ways during space weather events. An X-ray flare might kill your HF radio, but leave your fiber optic links untouched. A geomagnetic storm might disrupt your satellite link, but your local VHF still works fine. Second, and this is huge, protect your power. Remember, even if your communication link itself survives a space weather event, if the power goes out at your radio towers, cell sites, or satellite Earth stations, you're still dead in the water. Make sure your critical communication sites have robust backup power. I'm talking about UPS systems for short-term protection and generators with sufficient fuel reserves for extended outages. CISA guidelines suggest up to 30 days of fuel for very critical sites. For really critical applications, consider radiation-hardened electronics. This isn't just for spacecraft anymore. Ground-level events from extreme solar particle storms can actually cause bit flips and malfunctions in regular electronics. At minimum, use equipment with error detection and correction in critical data paths. ECC memory, redundant processors, things that can detect and recover from radiation-induced errors. Develop space weather emergency procedures just like you would for any other potential hazard. Know what actions to take at different alert levels. Maybe you postpone firmware updates during active space weather periods, or you switch to manual backup systems when severe storms are forecast. Train your operators to understand these alerts. Make space weather monitoring part of your daily operational routine, especially if you're in a high-risk industry like pipeline operations or power generation. If you're dependent on cellular communications, talk to your service provider about their timing resilience. Modern networks need precise timing from GPS, and when that fails, the whole network can go down. Some providers are implementing backup timing systems using fiber optic networks, but you need to ask specifically about this. As we move toward more connected industrial systems, IIoT devices, 5G networks, AI-driven automation, our vulnerability to space weather is actually increasing, not decreasing. Take the new LEO satellite constellations everyone's excited about for industrial communications. They offer great performance, but they're sitting in an orbital environment where geomagnetic storms can dramatically increase atmospheric drag. We saw this with those lost Starlink satellites I mentioned earlier. The challenge is that everything's becoming interconnected. A GPS timing failure doesn't just affect navigation anymore. It can cascade through cellular networks, power grid synchronization, financial transaction systems. We're creating systems of systems where a space weather event can have far-reaching, unexpected consequences. The solution isn't to avoid new technology, but to design resilience into these systems from the ground up. Space weather needs to be part of the conversation from day one, not an afterthought. Look, I've been in this industry for 35 years, and I've learned that the threats you don't prepare for are the ones that bite you the hardest. Solar flares and space weather aren't science fiction. They're operational realities that can and will impact your Scada systems. The good news is that with some basic awareness, monitoring, and planning, you can significantly reduce your vulnerability. Start simple, bookmark spaceweather.gov, understand the alert scales, and make sure your critical sites have solid backup power. Most importantly, don't wait for the next Carrington event to start thinking about this. The sun operates on an 11-year cycle, and we're heading towards solar maximum in the next few years. Activity is increasing. So here's what I want you to do. First, go check out the resources I mentioned. I'll put all the links in the description below. Second, take a critical look at your communication infrastructure and identify your single points of failure. And third, start the conversation with your team about space weather preparedness. If this opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more practical industrial controls content. And hey, drop a comment below. Have you ever experienced unexplained communication failures that might have been space weather related? I'd love to hear your stories and experiences. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay prepared, and keep those systems running. This is Alana, and I'll see you in the next video.